The war in Ukraine has entered a dangerous new phase. A reported CIA alert, rising tensions around Crimea, and sudden strategic shifts are putting Vladimir Putin under intense pressure. Is 2025 the year the conflict changes forever? Stay with us, because what's happening now could reshape global power overnight. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we are breaking down one of the most serious developments in the Ukraine war, as 2025 begins. Reports of a CIA alert combined with sudden shifts around Crimea are increasing pressure on Russian leadership and raising global concern. While no official intelligence documents are public, multiple strategic signals suggest Western agencies are closely monitoring Crimea as a potential turning point. This is not about rumors or panic, but about analyzing visible movements, diplomatic language, and military positioning. Crimea remains central to Russia's identity, military access, and political messaging. Any perceived threat or change in strategy around this region automatically raises alarms in Moscow. At the same time, Ukraine has adjusted its approach, focusing less on dramatic announcements and more on calculated pressure. This quieter strategy is making analysts nervous because it suggests preparation rather than reaction. The CIA's role in assessing escalation risks is critical, especially when nuclear rhetoric has already been used in past phases of the war. In this video, we will carefully examine what these signals mean, why Putin may feel shaken, and how 2025 could mark a shift in the conflict's direction. This is an analysis based on facts, trends, and expert observations, not propaganda or speculation. Watch till the end, because the final implications affect not only Ukraine and Russia, but the entire global security system. Crimea is not just another territory in the Ukraine conflict. It is the emotional and strategic core of Russia's war narrative. Since its annexation in 2014, Crimea has been portrayed by the Kremlin as untouchable and permanently Russian. This is why any shift in strategy around Crimea instantly changes the tone of the war. In recent months, Ukraine has avoided bold public claims while quietly strengthening pressure routes that affect supply lines, intelligence coverage, and diplomatic messaging related to the peninsula. Western analysts have noticed this restraint, interpreting it as a sign of maturity and long-term planning. For Russia, this silence is more threatening than loud declarations. When combined with intelligence monitoring from agencies like the CIA, the situation becomes even more tense. Intelligence alerts do not always mean imminent action. Often they indicate heightened risk awareness. Crimea hosts critical naval assets, air defense systems, and symbolic value for Putin's leadership image. Losing control or appearing vulnerable there could undermine domestic confidence in the Kremlin. That is why even small developments around Crimea carry oversized consequences. In 2025, the battlefield is not only physical, but psychological. Control of perception, timing, and uncertainty now matters as much as territory. Crimea sits at the center of this psychological struggle, making every move around it deeply destabilizing for Russia's strategic planning. The mention of a CIA alert does not automatically imply direct intervention or confrontation. Intelligence agencies constantly evaluate risk levels, escalation possibilities, and strategic miscalculations. What makes this moment different is the convergence of intelligence attention with visible geopolitical tension. Western officials have increasingly used cautious language, emphasizing preparedness rather than optimism. This shift suggests that behind closed doors, concerns about misinterpretation or rapid escalation are growing. Putin's leadership style relies heavily on projecting control and predictability to his domestic audience. When intelligence agencies highlight uncertainty, it indirectly challenges that image. The Kremlin thrives on clear red lines, but Ukraine's evolving strategy around Crimea appears deliberately ambiguous. This ambiguity complicates Russia's decision-making process. Intelligence agencies like the CIA focus heavily on preventing surprise escalation, especially involving critical regions. Crimea qualifies as such a region due to its military infrastructure and political symbolism. Any perceived weakening of Russian dominance there could trigger unpredictable responses. That is why intelligence monitoring intensifies during such phases. Rather than signaling aggression, the alert underscores concern about stability. This situation reflects how modern conflicts are managed through anticipation and analysis, rather than sudden declarations. The intelligence community's increased focus highlights how close the conflict is to a strategic crossroads. Decisions made in 2025 could lock both sides into a long-term trajectory that reshapes Eastern Europe's security landscape. From Putin's perspective, Crimea represents more than military advantage. It is a personal political legacy. Russian state media has repeatedly framed Crimea as proof of restored national strength. Any challenge to this narrative weakens the Kremlin's credibility. As Ukraine applies pressure through indirect methods, Russia faces a dilemma. Respond too aggressively, and it risks broader international backlash. Respond too cautiously, and it appears vulnerable. This strategic trap is what analysts believe is currently unsettling Moscow. Reports suggest increased defensive measures and heightened rhetoric, which often signal internal concern rather than confidence. Intelligence assessments likely focus on how Russia might react under stress, especially if symbolic losses occur. Putin's leadership is deeply tied to projecting inevitability and control. Crimea's status supports that image. Therefore, uncertainty itself becomes a weapon against Russia. Western allies understand this dynamic and emphasize unity and preparedness rather than provocation. The goal appears to be deterrence through stability rather than escalation. In this environment, intelligence warnings function as safeguards, not threats. They aim to prevent miscalculations that could spiral beyond control. For Putin, managing perception internally while navigating external pressure is becoming increasingly difficult. The longer Crimea remains a focal point, the greater the strain on Russia's strategic messaging. This pressure defines the current phase of the war more than any single military engagement. Ukraine's approach entering 2025 reflects lessons learned from previous years of conflict. Instead of dramatic announcements, the strategy now emphasizes consistency, patience, and international coordination. This shift frustrates Russian planners who rely on predicting Ukraine's next move. Crimea's geography makes it sensitive to logistical disruptions and information exposure. Even without direct confrontation, pressure can accumulate through surveillance, diplomatic alignment, and targeted messaging. Western intelligence agencies closely observe how these elements interact. The CIA's analytical role includes assessing whether gradual pressure could provoke disproportionate responses. This concern explains heightened alertness rather than alarm. Ukraine benefits from allowing uncertainty to grow while maintaining plausible deniability. For Russia, uncertainty erodes confidence among both military planners and the public. The Kremlin's reliance on controlled narratives struggles against slow, silent shifts. Analysts suggest that this phase of the war prioritizes endurance over spectacle. Crimea symbolizes the ultimate endurance test for Russia's occupation strategy. If Ukraine can sustain pressure without triggering escalation, it gains strategic advantage. Intelligence agencies aim to ensure that this balance does not collapse unexpectedly. The international community's involvement focuses on managing risk while supporting Ukraine's sovereignty. This careful coordination reflects how modern conflicts are increasingly shaped by restraint as much as force. The outcome depends on which side better manages pressure over time. Global reaction to rising tensions around Crimea has been measured but attentive. European leaders emphasize vigilance while avoiding language that could inflame the situation. This diplomatic restraint mirrors intelligence assessments that prioritize stability. The CIA's monitoring fits within a broader network of allied intelligence sharing. Such coordination aims to reduce blind spots that could lead to misjudgment. Russia, however, often interprets increased surveillance as hostility, regardless of intent. This perception gap increases risk. Putin's government frequently frames intelligence attention as evidence of Western interference. Yet behind the rhetoric, defensive preparations indicate genuine concern. Crimea's strategic location amplifies every signal, making neutrality difficult. Markets, security forums, and defense analysts all track developments closely. Even subtle changes influence global energy routes and military planning. Ukraine's allies appear committed to preventing escalation while maintaining pressure. This balancing act defines the international response. Intelligence alerts are part of this effort, not signs of imminent conflict. They represent caution in a volatile environment. As 2025 unfolds, the challenge lies in sustaining deterrence without provoking reaction. Crimea remains the focal point where this balance will be tested. How leaders interpret signals now may determine whether the conflict stabilizes or intensifies further. The psychological dimension of the Ukraine war has grown increasingly important. Information control, morale, and perception now influence outcomes as much as battlefield movements. Putin's leadership relies heavily on projecting certainty. Any suggestion that Crimea is vulnerable undermines that projection. Ukraine understands this and applies pressure indirectly. Intelligence agencies analyze how such psychological factors affect decision-making. A leader under pressure may act unpredictably, especially when legacy issues are involved. Crimea represents a legacy issue for Putin. This makes intelligence vigilance critical. The CIA and its counterparts aim to identify early warning signs of irrational escalation. At the same time, Ukraine benefits from international confidence in its restraint. This credibility strengthens diplomatic support. The contrast between Ukraine's measured approach and Russia's defensive posture shapes global opinion. Perception becomes a strategic asset. Crimea's symbolic value amplifies every message. In this phase of the war, silence can be louder than statements. The absence of dramatic announcements keeps opponents guessing. Intelligence assessments focus on managing this uncertainty responsibly. The goal is to maintain pressure without triggering panic. As both sides navigate this psychological terrain, the margin for error narrows. Careful interpretation of signals will define the months ahead. Looking ahead, 2025 may represent a decisive year, not because of one major battle, but due to accumulated pressure. Crimea's role as a strategic anchor means that gradual shifts could eventually force political recalculation. Intelligence agencies track long-term trends rather than isolated events. The CIA's interest likely reflects concern about cumulative effects. Russia's ability to sustain control over Crimea depends on logistics, morale, and international tolerance. Ukraine's strategy appears designed to test all three without crossing red lines. This approach complicates Russia's response options. International partners support Ukraine through coordination rather than confrontation. The emphasis remains on preventing escalation while reinforcing norms. Crimea's future will influence regional security architecture. Any change there affects Black Sea access and NATO planning. Intelligence alerts help policymakers anticipate consequences. Rather than signaling action, they promote preparedness. The challenge lies in interpreting intent accurately. Misreading silence or restraint could prove costly. As pressure builds, leadership decisions carry higher stakes. Crimea's symbolism ensures that outcomes resonate far beyond Ukraine. The international system watches closely. Whether this pressure leads to negotiation or prolonged tension remains uncertain. What is clear is that Crimea remains the axis around which strategic calculations revolve in 2025. Public narratives surrounding the war often oversimplify complex realities. Claims of sudden surrender or imminent collapse rarely reflect strategic truth. The situation around Crimea demonstrates this complexity. Ukraine's approach is incremental, not dramatic. Russia's response is cautious, not reckless. Intelligence agencies emphasize nuance because misunderstanding can lead to escalation. The CIA's analytical framework prioritizes context over headlines. This perspective helps prevent reactionary decisions. Putin's leadership faces internal and external pressures simultaneously. Balancing these pressures becomes harder as uncertainty grows. Crimea magnifies every challenge. The longer the status quo is questioned, the more strain it places on Russia's strategic posture. Ukraine's allies remain focused on unity and clarity. Avoiding misinformation is critical. Accurate analysis supports stability. This is why responsible discussion matters. Sensationalism increases risk. The reality is slower but more consequential. Crimea's future will be shaped by patience, pressure, and perception. Intelligence alerts remind policymakers of potential flashpoints. They encourage caution rather than fear. As audiences, understanding these dynamics helps separate analysis from speculation. The Ukraine war in 2025 is defined by restraint under pressure. Crimea stands as the ultimate test of that restraint. As we conclude, it is important to recognize that the Ukraine war has entered a phase where intelligence, diplomacy, and psychology dominate headlines more than direct confrontation. Crimea remains the symbolic and strategic center of gravity. Any shift there reverberates globally. The CIA alert represents vigilance, not provocation. It highlights the risks of miscalculation in a high-stakes environment. Putin's leadership is tested by uncertainty and pressure rather than force alone. Ukraine's measured strategy reflects confidence and learning. International partners emphasize stability while supporting sovereignty. The path forward is narrow. Decisions in 2025 will influence regional security for years. Understanding this context allows audiences to engage responsibly with the news. Avoiding exaggerated claims helps maintain clarity. The reality is complex but critical. Crimea's status continues to shape the war's trajectory. Intelligence assessments guide caution. As viewers, staying informed without panic is essential. This channel aims to provide balanced analysis grounded in observable trends. The coming months will test leadership, restraint, and resolve. Crimea remains at the heart of these tests. How this chapter unfolds will define the next era of European security. If you found this analysis valuable, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Share your thoughts in the comments, and stay informed with us as the Ukraine war continues to evolve.